It's episode 145 of the Author Stories podcast. I'm your host, Hank Garner. You can find all of the archives of the show over at hankgarner.com. And if you look over in the right-hand sidebar, there's some links where you can subscribe in iTunes or Google Play or Stitcher Radio or by email or even over at YouTube. And wherever you do subscribe, I appreciate you listening. I really do. This has been so fun to do these 145 episodes so far. It looks like our Christmas episode is going to be episode 150. I've got some cool things planned for December, so stick around. I just want you to know that I appreciate you listening. Please visit our sponsors. ThirdScribe.com is doing something really cool. Rob and the crew over there, you know, it started because they love books, and they love writers, and they love readers, and they really want to create a place where these people can come together, form lasting relationships, and can move past the consumer and seller relationship between reader and writer. So go visit ThirdScribe.com, see how you can plug in, whether you're an author and need help setting up a place to get your stuff noticed, or you're a reader that wants to discover new stuff. ThirdScribe.com. Please give them a visit. Please stay tuned for this spot from August Ansel and her new book, After the Pretty Pox. It's worse than that. God will ignore us entirely. A searing act of bioterrorism. A catastrophic plague they call the pretty pox. Most of the human race is dead, and for 2 years Ari McInnes has been alone, riding out the aftermath of the pretty pox, waiting for her own inevitable end. Hidden in the attic of her ruined home, Ari survives by wit and skill, ritual and habit, convinced that humans are a dangerous fluke, a problematic species best allowed to expire. She chooses solitude, even in matters of life and death. Ari's precarious world is upended when her youngest brother, a man she's never met, appears out of nowhere with a badly injured woman. Their presence in the attic draws the attention of a dark watcher in the woods, and Ari is forced to choose between the narrow beliefs that have sustained her and the stubborn instinct to love and protect. In Book 1 of August Ansel's captivating new post-apocalyptic series, After the Pretty Pox, cast an unwavering eye on what it means to be human in a world where nature has the upper hand, and the only rules left to live by, for good or ill, are the ones written on our hearts. After the Pretty Pox, The Attic, by August Ansel is available now on Amazon.com. Check the show notes for the link. Pick up your copy today of After the Pretty Pox, The Attic, by August Ansel. August Ansel is the pen name of Carla Baku. Find her website at www.carlabaku.com. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, the storyteller I have on the show with me is Matthew FitzSimmons, an author that I've recently discovered, and when I emailed him, I told him that he was responsible for me losing several nights' sleep with his new book, or his fairly new book, The Short Drop, and he emailed me back and he said, sorry, not sorry for that, and we had a good laugh. But welcome to the show, Matthew.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
My first memory, I was in the eighth grade. We got an assignment to write a short story for my English class, and we were supposed to write 5 pages. I wrote 30, and I had recently discovered fantasy. So I'd read Lord of the Rings and Elfstones of Shannara and things like that. And I wrote 30 pages, and my mother was an interior designer, and I borrowed this set of stencils from her to make a I had to handwrite the whole thing because I'm old enough that there were no computers. That's not true. There were computers. I just didn't have one. But I wanted to make a really nice cover page, and I misspelled the title of the story, and it just crushed me. And I didn't write anything again for years.
Oh wow. That's, those early fantasy novels have been the downfall of many a young man and woman. Sucked many of us down the rabbit hole and led to this vagrant lifestyle of writing. But you had an interesting upbringing, from what I've read from your bio. You were raised in England?
Yeah, I'm originally from a small town outside of Chicago called Wheaton, and when we were about 3, my dad was transferred to London he was a young guy at a bank called Northern Trust, and they were looking for to staff up a London branch. American banks were getting heavy into investing in Europe in the early 70s. And so we went over there for 8 years, and it was an amazing time. It was the mid '70s, and London was still kind of in a post World War II funk, if you can believe it. 30 years afterwards, but it was sort of the rise of the Sex Pistols and the Clash and punk, and they were all sort of down there in downtown London. It was just an amazing time.
Well, I can only imagine because London is this sort of ancient city. But during the air raids and such in World War II, there was quite a lot of devastation and stuff. So you probably got this mix of old and new, and a city trying to find itself. And I guess out of that is born, like you said, the Sex Pistols and that whole kind of counterculture. And I would imagine that would be a really exciting time to be there.
What was amazing about it was that there was still bomb damage.
Wow.
In the 70s. There you could still see buildings with bomb damage. England was so poor. I mean, if you go back and you read the biographies of like Keith Richards or any of the Monty Python guys, they all talk about being on, they had something called green books, where you have to, where basically you got food rations. You got your weekly allotment of meat and dairy and whatnot, and you got it was like the entire country was on food stamps essentially. I mean, and this was a country that had been the wealthiest country on earth for 500 years, and in the blink of an eye had lost the ability to basically do much of anything.
How crazy
for themselves.
How old were you when you moved there?
3.5, 4 years old.
Okay, so you didn't have a real American sensibility when you went there, I guess. That was just the new culture that you just kind of took up from your formative years, I would imagine.
It was pretty much the first call. I mean, at 4 years old, you're not, at least I was not particularly aware of culture. I knew I was American. I knew I was American because some of the English boys used to beat me up. I remember getting beat up once in school and was told rather aggressively that, quote unquote, we didn't need your help to win the war. I didn't even know what the hell they were talking about. I was like, I'm sure you didn't. Could you please stop? And I also have an Irish last name. So, this was, 69 was the kickoff of the modern Troubles, or like the latest phase of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. And so to be both American and have an Irish surname in the 70s in England was interesting. I didn't really, but again, I was like too young to really understand what was going on. It was really only in retrospect that I, understood.
Wow. So you were there for, did you say 8 or 9 years?
7 or 8. We
Okay.
came back in the early 80s, 81 or so.
Okay. So you would have been just preteen to early teenage years when you came back to America?
Yeah, I got back and started the 7th grade. I had an English accent. I had the whole 9 yards. I like to joke. I'm tall. I'm 6'6", and in 7th grade, I think I was 6 foot or 6'1" already, and I weighed about $105. I had an English accent. No one knew what the heck to do with me, and it was a bumpy landing. I'll tell you that
Oh
much.
man, how did that affect you? The kind of assimilating back into American culture. Did you make friends easily? Did you? Was this around the same time that you discovered fantasy literature, or did that come later?
It was about that time. I didn't make friends very easily. I there was a period where I think I would say it was a pretty rough transition. I retreated in, there's a lot of kids who don't quite fit in, and I definitely didn't quite fit in. I retreated into books and music, and my mother bought me a Dungeons and Dragons set, which I thought was the coolest thing, but as I later discovered, was not at all cool. And yeah, I kind of was a sort of a just basically a self-contained unit for a couple.
I think that's the story of a lot of us at that age. Yeah, and I remember that those hobbits being closer friends of mine than anybody else for a while. What? When did you realize that those stories that you had grown to love, that you were going to do that one day? Did that? When did you say, I think I can actually write something and I can be a writer?
It's a good question. I got involved in theater later in high school, and through the last few years of high school and college, and then when I graduated from college, I went to New York actually to pursue a career in theater. I wanted to be a director. I wanted to tell sort of stories on stage. I was very interested in film. That was another thing that in the summertime, I would go to 5 or 6 movies a day because they didn't check your tickets. So I would just buy a ticket and then go from movie to movie to movie to movie. And I'd watch things over and over and over again. I think I learned more about storytelling just from, rewatching the same things over and over and over again. I burned a hole in my parents. The dawn of the video store was another saving grace for me. Was I would rent 4 or 5 movies at a time and just absorb all of it. So so I went to New York, and I kind of got my ass kicked a little bit, as New Yorkers want to do with those who are constitutionally unprepared for it. But I was in the New York theater scene for about 3 years. A weird highlight there was my very first thing. I was a production assistant on a little play, and the cast was I was 22 years old, and the cast was Ethan Hawke and Steve Zahn and Anthony Rapp, who was in Dazed and Confused and was the lead in Rent. And there was a little 8-year-old girl in the show whose mother would bring her. She didn't stay for curtain call. She had one scene at the end of the first act, and then she left, and that was the only thing she did. And that girl turned out to be Scarlett Johansson. Uh, it was her. I didn't know it at the time. I mean, she was 8 years old. Who the hell knew? But after I saw Lost in Translation years later, and I was like, this woman is talented. And I went and I looked her up, and sure enough, the name of that play was on her list of credits. And I was like, wait a minute, I worked on that. There was no. Oh, that girl. So it was. So it was an amazing couple of years. But there came a point when I knew that. Theater was not going to be for me. And I happened to be, when you live in New York and you're in the arts, you sort of live in a series of what I would call illegal sublets. I lived all over New York. This was back before Brooklyn was a thing. So I was all over Manhattan, from the upper 90s down to the Lower East Side, Upper West Side, Upper West Side. And one of my roommates was a writer, and he kind of got me interested in writing again. So I wrote my first novel in my 20s. That was when I thought that I was going to do this for a living. I was wrong, but that was what I thought.
You brought. I want to get back to that in just a minute, but there's something that you that you mentioned a minute ago that I really want to touch on for a second. You talked about going to movies and kind of rewatching those over and over again and recycling your movie tickets. You're not the first person who's come on the show and told that story before. I think we all did that in the 70s, and it was a great time for movie going. But there's an argument that to be a great writer, you really need to read. And I completely agree with that. I think that you need to understand the mechanics of writing and the way language sounds and all of that. But I think there's something to be said for studying other forms of storytelling, and movies in particular, that are very beneficial to writers. And I totally agree with you. I think immersing yourself in film can go a long way toward helping you bring a visual aspect to your writing. Would you agree?
I think it's different for different writers. I think thinking about story structure in any form is useful. I think I go to your point. I think absolutely you can't be a writer without also being a reader. But I'll be honest with you. By the time I graduated from college, I was a terrible writer. I was formally weak. I was a terrible speller. My writing was kind of an embarrassment. I had moved really far away from it, and it really took a good part of my 20s to retrain myself. And that was what you said was, I did a lot of reading. There was a lot of what I realized when I decided that I wanted to try writing. The first thing I had to confront was I didn't know how to do it, and I felt I was way behind the curve. So I had a lot of catch-up work, a lot of homework to do. I was a high school teacher for 12 years, and I told that story to my students a lot. A lot of them who struggled as writers, and I made the argument to them that writing is a skill. Writing, you can learn to write. This idea that we are not, I think in the United States in particular, we have such a fetish for gift. We want to believe that people are just gifted. We don't want to see the hard work. I mean, I think of Michael Jordan. I know he's not a writer per se, but he's an example of it. Is that he was a very gifted athlete. He was also one of the hardest working athletes in terms of perfecting what he did. He worked monumentally hard in the off season to add elements to his game, to improve himself. But we like to just think of him as a sort of natural, gifted, force of nature, and I don't think that's how it is. I think art is hard work, in whatever form you pursue it.
Yes, I completely agree with you that art is hard work, and we have to hone that craft. We talk about that a lot on the show. Is that there's a lot of work that goes in the background that people don't see, and we see a lot of so-called overnight successes that are really 10 and 20-year successes that just happen to appear overnight, but people have put in that hard work. I have a theory that people are storytellers, but writers are made. I think a lot of us are born with a, I don't even like to use the word gift, kind of like what you were talking about earlier, because it gives the wrong impression. But I think most of us as humans, there's a want and a need to share story. But actually effectively communicating that takes a lot of work. So I completely agree with what you're saying, and I like the way you put it. Tell me about, how did you become a school teacher in the midst of all this?
So I spent about 4 or 5 years writing the great American novel in my 20s, not in my 1920s, just in my 20s. By the time I was done with it, I was about 28 years old. It was neither great nor especially American, as I like to joke. it sounded a lot like the authors that I liked than myself. It was I had sort of fallen into that first time trap of imitation rather than creation, I suppose. And I didn't really like writing anymore. I'd sort of given my 20s up to it. I sort of felt like I'd taken my shot, and it wasn't very good. And I sort of looked around, and people my age were getting married and getting graduate degrees and buying houses, and I'd been waiting tables and sort of doing it the hard way. So I took a job. I worked in the tech sector for a couple of years in the late '90s and really hated it. And then at about 32 or 33, started cast. I had a midlife crisis at 32, which is a strange time to have a midlife crisis. But I think they come. Everyone sort of thinks it's in your 40s, but I think it happens whenever it happens. And a couple of people suggested teaching, and I said to them, "Are you out of your mind? Have you met me? I don't like kids." But they said, "We think you'd be good at it." And an opportunity came along and sort of fell into my lap to teach 12th grade English at a private high school not far from where I lived. And I jumped and I took it, and it was the best thing that I ever did. Just a fantastic job. And really what got me interested in writing again was teaching writing and talking about books. And you said something earlier about that you can't be a writer unless you read broadly. I've made the argument that it's important to read widely and to read a great number of authors, but there's also something to be said for reading repetitively and to read the same book. If you find a book that really speaks to you and that you think really works, read it again and again and again until you understand it. I mean, the beautiful thing about teaching English was, for example, I taught Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon for 5 years, and in that time I read it 20 times. Toni Morrison is a master.
And you really get a different appreciation. I think because there's so many books to read, and so I look at my Kindle sometimes and I'm thinking, I'll never get through everything that I want to read before I die. But there's something to be said for taking something, sitting with it, really, really letting it absorb. And I think as writers, we like to think that we put things like that into our books that people would want to kind of dig and find those little hidden treasures, but we don't give ourselves very much opportunity to look for those.
I mean, what's your favorite movie, Hank?
Oh, say that again?
What's your favorite movie?
Oh, gosh. My favorite movie. That's hard.
I put you on the spot. A favorite movie. What's a movie you've seen a lot of times?
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Okay, how many?
How many times have I seen it? At least 20.
Yeah, exactly. So I rewatched Midnight Run the other night. So, a friend of mine hadn't seen it. Like movies we listened to over and over and over again. I remember getting a cassette of Paul's Boutique by the Beastie Boys when it came out, and I hated it. And everyone was talking about it, and I listened to it in my car like 5 or 6 times through. Hated it. Threw it in the back seat. Didn't look at it again. Didn't listen to it again for 6 months. And then one day I was driving along, and I reached back and I picked it up and I put it back in, and I got it. But it took. We listen to music we love over and over and over. We listen to movies, watch movies, television, all these different arts we consume repeatedly. But books, and I get it, because books can be a bigger time commitment than a movie. A movie you can watch in 2 hours and be done, but books. Think about the paragraphs that you have labored over to get exactly right, with the right balance of words and the length of the sentences, and the start to the end. And we read these things once, and we think we got your intent, or we think we understand everything the author, and then we move on. And I get that. I get that it's asking a lot. So I would only say that, that when you find something that really, when something really works for you, stop and figure out why.
That's great advice. So you spent time teaching did you say for 12 years? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
What do you think you learned from teaching? What do you think was the thing that you took away that allowed you to move to the next level and then actually realize the thing that you had given up, 10 years before?
Ooh, you really swung for the fences on that one. That's a good one. So many different things, which is one of those like nonsense stalling answers. So many different things, right?
That's like me trying to think of my favorite movie. Yeah. Yeah.
Play some background music, do a little tap dancing. I would say that one thing that was really was teaching 17-year-olds, most of whom are not readers. When kids are little, when they're 7, 8, 9, 10, all of my students, almost every single one of them had read all the Harry Potter books. They devoured them, and then most of them, particularly the boys, stopped reading. And we talked about it in my class. Sometime between 12 and 13 and 17, reading had stopped being a part of their lives. I always had a few readers. There were always some, but it was remarkable how many students looked at reading purely as something they did as quote-unquote work. It was their job as a student to read whatever torturous book I put in front of them next. And it was really an education thinking about how to engage with someone who found reading taxing and tiring, and I am a big reader, so my first instinct as a teacher was to be like, no, you're just doing it wrong. But as the years went on, you just sort of had to stop and go, all right, I'm going to stop assuming you're wrong, and I'm going to listen. It's embarrassing it took me that long to learn that skill, but I stopped and I listened to them, and listening to them talk about their relationship with books and how they read, I think was hugely impactful to me, and I thought through how I wrote and how to reach that person was a good sort of thought exercise or a thought experiment. But there's teaching was revelatory for me, just on sort of every level. They were just amazing kids.
It was really unfair of me to ask you to nail down the one thing, and I realized it was unfair when I asked you, but I knew you were a good sport. So, but yeah, I've had a similar situation. Several years ago, I taught some college, kind of some entry-level web design classes and computer repair and stuff like that, and there's just something completely different when you are on the other side of the desk, and I tell people this all the time. If you really want to learn something, or if you really want to open yourself up to new experiences, find something to teach to someone else. It really is a game changer. You may not be a teacher in a classroom, but find a way to do that. It really is an eye-opening experience in so many ways.
100%.
So how did we get from there to having a fully realized novel, The Short Drop, that does not suck, and that is an amazing book? You kind of gave up on the thing in the 20s, but now here you are with this fascinating book with over 7,000 reviews, very positive reviews on Amazon.
So it still seems a little bit surreal to me.
As it should.
In my 20s, I sort of felt like I took my shot at my dream. I wanted to be an artist first. I wanted to be in theater, then I wanted to write. Neither one of those worked out, and it kind of knocked me back. But I sort of took that sort of stereotypical view that your 20s were for your dreams, and after that, if they hadn't happened, it was time to get real. That point that a lot of artists face, whether they're actors or painters or writers, where you sort of think, okay, I had my window, I took my shot, and now I need to be practical. I can't afford to be. I can't afford. This dream will start to cost more and more the longer I held on to it. Unfortunately, I fell into a profession that I really liked, which was teaching. But and for all intents and purposes, I was done with writing. And gradually, I started writing again. I would say about 5 or 6 years ago. I started writing little pieces in the summer here and there, with no intention of anyone ever seeing it or anything of that nature. And one Christmas, I'll try and tell this story quickly, or tell you the abbreviated version. But one Christmas, I think 4 years ago, an uncle who had been an editor at a magazine and had retired cornered me at my parents' Christmas party and asked me whether I'd ever heard of something called Thriller Fest. And I said no. And he said, well, it's a conference in New York City where writers and agents and wannabe authors go, and it's a 4-day conference, and you go to sessions and so forth and so on. And he said, do you want to go? He said, I'm interested in writing a thriller. Do you want to come with me? I said, no, it doesn't really sound like me, Dave, but thanks. We had dinner, and I got to thinking, and that in the long story short, maybe that's too late now, but long story short, I said yes, and we went to this conference. It's in July in New York on 42nd Street every year, and I sat in these sessions and I listened to these authors, and at the end of the 4 days, I had this thought that I could write a thriller. I could do this. Unbelievably arrogant. I didn't know at all what I was talking about, but I thought I could do that. So I went home, and I spent all summer. I'd never really read thrillers before. That wasn't a genre that I had ever read. So I sort of came at them kind of a blank slate. And I spent all summer, I was off as a teacher, spent all summer just absorbing thrillers. My stepfather, who lived close to me, had read every thriller ever written. Had read all the Ross McDonalds, and had just read, you name it, he'd read it and he had it. And I just would go over there and I'd borrow them sort of 5 or 6 at a time and read them, tear them apart the way I do with books. And by the end of the summer, I had an idea for a book. And so about that time, the relationship that I was in came to an end, and I was not in a good place. And honestly, I started the book just as a exercise of sort of escaping from sort of my day-to-day life, which was not where I wanted it to be. So I wrote a thriller, and it took me 2.5 years, and it was not at all the book that I started with.
As they rarely are.
As they rarely are. I mean, I had this grand concept, and I got 30,000 words into it and realized it was all wrong, and basically started again. And at the end of the 2.5 years, I had a book, amazingly.
Nice. So what did you do then? Did you shop it around to agents? So
this is a story that usually gets me thrown out of I got incredibly lucky. I kind of had the the whirlwind that does, as my agent said, doesn't happen. I finished the book in the spring. It was actually my school spring break. I was in Florida. I finished it, and I spent the rest of the spring putting together an agent list, hunting down agent names, writing my query letter, getting it all polished, getting ready to go. And in the midst of that, a friend of mine handed the book. A friend of a friend had lunch with an agent in Dallas, who pitched him my book, somewhat against his will. And at the end of the lunch, he asked to read it, and she gave him a copy of it. And he flew to New York. That was on a Tuesday, and on Friday he called me from Newark Airport and said, "I love your book. I want to sign you. I want to do this," and it just sort of took off from there. I had given myself 18 months to find an agent. Everyone said that this is the hardest part of it, and I was sort of dreading it. And then, I did I literally was the perfect guy in the perfect time. I could not have asked for a better agent. It was just unbelievable.
How incredible. Serendipity and all those other words that's amazing. That's amazing. And so the book eventually landed.
It's one of those stories that I tell it, and writers are like, all right,
right.
Get out. Just
right.
Get out. I don't ever want to see you again.
Whatever, FitzSimmons.
I don't blame you for that.
Yeah.
Exactly. You're off.
No Christmas cards for FitzSimmons. But the book landed at Thomas & Mercer, which is an Amazon-owned publisher, which has just been doing gangbusters lately. Had some of the best books of the last year or two that I've read have been, either 47 North or Thomas & Mercer, and they're just doing awesome stuff over there. How has your relationship with them been, and how do you feel like being on one of the Amazon arms of the publishing industry has really helped to launch your first book?
So my relationship with them is fantastic. I could not be happier with the people that I work with.
Everybody says that. That's great.
They've been. They have been. Now again, it's my only experience, so I don't have anything to compare it to. But they have been incredibly responsive and supportive, and Amazon is an innovator, and they have that. One of the reasons that Short Drop came out of the gate as strongly as it did was it was a Kindle First title in November of 2015. Are you familiar with that? Does that?
Yeah.
You know what that is? Okay, so when they told me that it was going to be a Kindle First in November, I said, "What is that?" I didn't know what it was, and they said, "Well, we're going to give it away free for a month." And I went, "Wait a minute." Wait. And my agent literally put his hand over her mouth and was like, "Shut up. We are doing this. This is, you don't know it yet, but this is the best thing that ever happened to you." And it was. There are 40 million Amazon Prime members. And I mean, if you're listening and you're an Amazon Prime member, I'm gonna sell it to you. If you're an Amazon Prime member, you get a choice of 6 books every month, and you can download one of them for free a month before they come out. And it was this unbelievable, what I would just call rocket fuel under the launch of the book that no one else can really manage. And by the time, at the end of the month, we had, it had been downloaded hundreds of thousands of times.
And to just give people a little bit of perspective, a lot of authors, especially indie authors, will give away ARC copies or advanced reader copy or advanced review copies before a book launches to help generate some buzz with your typical reading audience. Also, when you launch the book, you have people ready to leave reviews for it. So when the book comes out, it's brand new, but people see that people are already raving about it, and there's already some buzz generated, which then just shoots it into the stratosphere. But imagine that on the scale of Amazon opening those ARC copies to their whole Amazon Prime base. It's I couldn't think of anything better for a writer promotion wise than that.
No, especially for a debut author. I mean, they only they've never had anyone up, at least until this point, do Kindle first twice. It's sort of but it's a just phenomenal launch vehicle. I mean, I got more eyes on, if the object is a new novelist, is to get your name out there and to get eyes on your page. Nothing else would have come close. You look at, it was beyond anything I had anticipated.
Well, let's talk about the book. So the short drop is about Gibson Vaughn, and he is an interesting character. When I first found the book, the synopsis really intrigued me. You've got a computer hacker who's also an ex-Marine. You've got some political intrigue. You've got a missing persons case. All of these things, I was my oldest daughter and I share a love of kind of crime, mystery, thriller kind of things, and we'll look together at things that fit some of those genres sometimes, and I came across this and said, "Oh, this sounds really good. Let's read it." And we started reading it on our Kindle separately, and we would talk for a couple of days and kind of compare notes. And one of the first things, besides just the setup, that really intrigued me when I started reading it is you really handle this computer hacker in a very smart and in a responsible way, and by that I mean that you're accurate with your technology descriptions. And so many times people think they can just throw a hacker into a story, and you even go to kind of deconstruct some of those tropes in the book itself, where you talk about how people in movies just try to out-type each other, and you've got 60 seconds with a gun to your head to hack into a system, but you really dispel a lot of those and kind of bring some reality to it. And as a person who's worked in IT for over 20 years before doing what I do now, I really appreciated that. And it made it more enjoyable for me. Didn't break the story immersion when I got in there. I wasn't rolling my eyes and throwing the Kindle across the room. It was really well done. But tell us where Gibson Vaughn and this whole kind of setup came from.
So, when I wrote a book in my 20s, it was the book whose name we shall not speak. It was a pretty autobiographical novel, and I had no real desire to do that again. So, the story came first, and Gibson Vaughn followed. I kind of built the character to suit the story I was trying to tell, and that for me was very freeing, because it allowed me to write about someone who is not at all like me. I'm not a hacker. I have not been in the Marines. That's none of Gibson's biographical details and mine overlap. To what you said, that was a really important aspect to me. The idea that Gibson would be a hacker came rather late. I knew I wanted him to have some skill set that would sort of set him apart. And I was having dinner with a friend of mine who builds skiffs and does a lot of top secret work in and around Washington D.C. where I live. And we were having dinner, and he told me he was telling me about Stuxnet, which this was 4 or 5 years ago, and Stuxnet has of late become a much better known event. There's a very good documentary on it now. But he told me the story of Stuxnet, which, if you're not familiar with it, it's basically the virus that most likely the Israelis and the United States designed to break the Iranian nuclear reactors. And the story of how they did it was so fascinating to me. And I thought this was the story of this kind of hacking. I felt had never been told before, and that had always been sort of the Hollywood swordfish nonsense version of computers. And computers, I thought it would be really interesting to write a character who was a hacker who was not in a cyber thriller. And it was important to me that Short Drop not be a cyber thriller. This was a character who used computers, who worked with computers, the way a detective in the 1940s would have worked with the tools that, of their era. And I always wanted to think about Gibson less as a hacker than, a character who used hacking,
right?
If that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. You said that the story came first. What was it about the political intrigue part? Was this something you'd been thinking about for a while, or did it just seem like this would be a great story to add to the mix?
The political aspect came late. It was sort of the story layered up. The original story wasn't about anything. None of what is in Short Drop was originally what I set out to do. And so there was this layering on as the story. Once I got on the right path, the political aspect came basically. Well, I don't want to. I want to talk around it. As I was trying to figure out how to make the missing persons case relate back to Gibson's life, that's when the political aspect came into it. It seemed like it was really more of a tool to sort of bind all the elements of the story into one. All these different facets of Gibson's life sort of come back on him, and the political thread was really only built in so that they all had a natural connective tissue, if that makes any sense. But I didn't actually set out to write a political thriller. It sort of emerged almost by accident, or out of writerly convenience.
One of those happy accidents that at the end you're like, oh, I'm so happy that accident happened. And we won't spoil too much about the book because there's more twists and turns than a politician. And right when I thought there were things about that, I'm trying to choose my words so I don't spoil it for certain people. So I'm going to abandon that question I was about to ask, but I will say this. You drop in little hints about things that I assume you love throughout the book. There's a thread through there about Lord of the Rings, and I could tell that this was one of the things that you dearly loved, and I love when writers do that, when you just kind of sprinkle these little trails throughout the books. Was that something that just came natural to you? Was that I do that sometimes, and I'll kind of smile to myself and hope that other people pick up on it. But I love that you did that.
Yeah, that is one autobiographical detail that is actually mine. I read The Hobbit to my little brother as a bedtime story. It took us forever, but that was where the idea for that came from. And it was it was a nice bonding thing between me and my brother, and I couldn't. Reading is such an intimate, quiet thing to do, to read aloud to someone, and I liked that idea that Gibson read to Suzanne, and that Suzanne sort of awoke Gibson's intellectual curiosity and sort of, that they both, that Suzanne gave it. Suzanne is this, even as a little girl, she it's an interesting challenge when it's a missing persons case, and Suzanne is the missing person. So how do you make that person real to the reader? How do you make that person someone the reader cares about when you don't get to spend very much time with them? So you got to really pick details that will resonate, and I hope
it absolutely did. That was a genius bit of storytelling to build in that sympathy with the character, and when other people read it, you'll understand what we're talking about. We're purposefully being cagey because you really need to read the book. But you followed that book up with Poison Feather, which is the second in the Gibson Vaughn series. Was it hard for you to dream up another story to drop Gibson into?
Yeah, I mean, it's very. I'm working on the third right now, which is due. It's due in about 60 days. So it's the series writing, which is something that I'm learning how to do on the job. It's an interesting. There are pros and cons to it. The pros is that when you write the second one, you have your character. I didn't have to invent Gibson. I knew who he was. But then you have what I would call sort of an interesting dilemma. I've come to call it the Simpsons Dilemma, which is, if you've ever seen an episode of The Simpsons, on any given episode of The Simpsons, Homer could accidentally nuke Springfield. Right. And next Sunday, Springfield is going to be just fine. That Simpsons is, with very few exceptions, there are, the death of Maud Flanders notwithstanding, Simpsons is largely a consequence-free, learning-free environment. Maggie remains forever 2 years old, however old she is. Bart is always in the fourth grade, and someone's going to know my Simpsons trivia is weak, so I'm going to quit faking. But essentially, week to week, nothing that they do has any impact on who they are as people. Homer is a constant, and I think for writing series fiction, thriller fiction series, that is, that's sort of an essential question the author has to decide: is my character going to evolve, or is my character going to be the same? Is my character going to be frozen at this age in this mental state, and essentially be a constant, a familiar and comfortable constant across books? I think the examples on both sides would be, Harry Potter, which is a young adult, but it's without question, to my mind, falls within the thriller genre. But that's sort of an ultimate example of a series where the character evolves. I mean, we watch him grow up. We watch him we watch him face new challenges, and he changes based on the things that happen to him. And then on the flip side, I would say Lee Child's Jack Reacher is a perfect example of a comfortable, stable, solid, book to book to book. Jack, you know that Jack Reacher is going to be Jack Reacher. So you got to kind of make that determination, which way you're going to go. And it was important. I fall more in the J.K. Rowling camp. I wanted Gibson to evolve and to grow. At the beginning of the series, he's 28 years old. And I kind of particularly made him 28 because I think it's going to be fun to watch him grow up. He's a pretty immature guy in Short Drop, and it's going to be interesting to watch. Or at least it will be for me. I hope it will be for readers also, to watch him evolve.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait to jump into the second book. I'm probably going to over the weekend, and I I love how you built character development into the first book, and I'm anxious to see how you carry it forward. That's I'm looking forward to it for sure. You said you're working on a third book now?
Yes, sir.
That's awesome. Do you how far into it are you?
I'm in the closing stages. I'm at so the typical length of your average thriller is roughly 100,000 words. I think, and it seems to me that the sweet spot is sort of 90, 95, but in sort of 100, somewhere in that range. So I am at 70,000 exactly, actually, as of basically when I stopped writing today to give you a call. So I have about 20 to go, and I hope it's due February the 1st. So the way I work is my goal is to have it finished at the end of the year. So I've got about 30 days to write 20,000 words, and then I'll spend the month of January doing rewrites before I submit it.
Awesome. Cannot wait to see it. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed the first book, and how much I've enjoyed getting to talk to you. Matthew FitzSimmons, where can people connect with you, follow your work, and get plugged in with what you do?
Easiest way is my website is www.matthewfitzsimmons.com, all one word. And my books are on Amazon and are easy to find.
Excellent. And we'll put links to everything in the show notes. Matthew, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Hank, it's terrific. Thank you so much. This was a blast.
You've been listening to the Author Stories podcast with Hank Garner. You can find all of the archives of the show over at hankgarner.com. When you're there, please subscribe to the show and leave a comment over on iTunes or Google Play. You can even subscribe at YouTube and Stitcher Radio. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy what I do, podcasting or my writing, please check out my Patreon campaign. There's a link at hankgarner.com. Be sure to tune in every Tuesday and Friday for brand new episodes of the Author Stories podcast. Thanks for listening.